this question here is a new one that we decided to add this time around, partly because of the Trump phenomenon and all the discussion about the anger out there among Republicans and even to some extent among Democrats if you think about Bernie Sanders' candidacy. And so here we have the numbers, and if the black bar is what the overall state is, you've got 9% of the state being content with affairs, 2/3 being frustrated, and 23% being angry. But of course, the interesting breakdown again becomes partly tied to the Tea Party. The Tea Partiers are angrier. That's no surprise at one level, but this measure actually provides some concrete indication of how angry. You know, that's a jump of 13%, percentage points for compared to independents and Republicans. But that 13% is actually another way to think of it, it's 50% higher.
But based on our poll today, that if the Democratic primary were held today, that Hillary Clinton would win Tennessee pretty overwhelmingly. The support for Hillary Clinton is 48%, Bernie Sanders is only 28%. So reflecting what's going on nationwide, Tennessee is not very competitive on the Democratic side. Among Republicans, it's a little more divided. So realize that our poll was being done at a point when Carson was falling nationally in the polls, and so that's reflected in our polls. So if the Republican primary were held today, Trump would win. So he held a brief lead over Carson, and that support is across the board. So we looked at a bunch of different Republicans groups, non-Tea Party Republicans, Tea Party Republicans, born-again Christian Republicans, and in every category practically, Trump is either in first or second place. So across the board, among Republicans in Tennessee, Trump has pretty strong support, and only Carson is close to him when the poll was done. The others is Cruz and Rubio and Bush, and after that, right, there's not a whole lot of support. So by far and away, at this point, when the poll was done, the race for the Republican primary in Tennessee was between Trump and Carson, and that's true across the board. So one thing we want to do is kind of what's the basis of who's supporting for Trump. And so this gets back to what John was asking, how the sentiment of Republican voters in Tennessee are. And so among those who are angry, 46% support Trump. So Republican voters in Tennessee who identify as angry, of which about 23% identifies as such, 46% are supporting Trump. So a lot of Trump support, while it's true that he's getting support from Tea Party, non-Tea Party, and Christian Republicans, those who say that they're angry about what's going on in politics today overwhelmingly support Trump. Our poll was in the field during the tragedy in Paris, and so given some discussion about the role of Islam and the practice of Islam and whether that ought to be regulated was an issue that some have talked about and was particularly salient at the time of this poll. And so one thing that we asked about is whether or not there should be restrictions, right, on the practice of based on religion. And so here, overwhelmingly, Tennesseans reject that, and they think that Muslims ought to have the right to practice their religion freely, 75%. And only 19% said that there should be laws restricting the religious freedom. But when you break that down out by partisan group, again, as John was talking about, we see, again, differences depending upon how you self-identify. So in particular, the most support for restrictions are among those who belong to the Tea Party. So here we did something a little bit different. We separated Republicans into those that are belonging to the Tea Party and those that do not belong to the Tea Party. Right? So this is different from what we did in other slides. And here what we see is that 41% of the Tea Parties believe that there ought to be laws restricting the practice of Islam. And only 17% of Republicans, only 19% of independents, and only 12% of Democrats. So by far and away, the support for any kind of infringement on the practice of religion, and Islam in particular, is coming from those who self-identify as Tea Party.
We asked a question in May about the gas tax, and there wasn't support for the gas tax. And, we thought a little bit about it. We also tried to do a little bit more digging on it. Gas tax, the sales tax per gallon is about 21 cents. It hadn't really been increased in a long time. We tried to think about what was going on, and we came up with a split ballot design where we asked 3 specific questions. Rather than saying, do you favor a gas tax or not, which then allows people to kind of fill in the amount, we decided to give them the amount. So we offered, do you want to have it at 2, would you be willing to support it if it was 2 cents? 2/3 of Tennesseans said yes, they'd support a 2-cent increase in gas tax. If you go to 8 cents, still a nice majority, 54-45, are game to have the increase in gas prices of 8 cents. When you go to 15 cents, the numbers turn, and all of a sudden now a majority do not want it to see 15%. This makes good sense in that the public is prepared to pay more gasoline tax, but they want to know the exact amount. And if you leave it open-ended, the fear is among many Tennesseans is it's going to be really high, like 15, 20, 25 cents. But if you give it a tangible amount that's a modest increase, there is in fact support for a gas tax.
If you think about who's contacting legislators and who's kind of making their voices heard, it may not necessarily be a representative sample of Tennesseans. So the people who are most active in politics typically and the most vocal in getting their opinions across are not the normal, in the kind of statistical sense, Tennesseans. And so one thing that our poll does, I think, is it shows that the people who might be writing the letters to the op-eds or kind of banging down the legislators' doors aren't necessarily reflective of the larger population of Tennesseans. And we do see some splits here in terms of by Republicans and Tea Party that suggest that maybe one group is slightly more represented in the actions of the state legislature than the other. But by and large, I think that what our poll does is it gives us a helpful corrective to think about, that when someone makes a claim that this is what Tennesseans think about, well, is that the Tennesseans who are talking to you and kind of contacting you versus the overall state of the state?